So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sir Martin Sorrell and Mr. Anurag Batra on stage, please. Very good evening.
Why don't we move the chairs a bit, make it a bit more matey so that I look at you and not look as though we're... That's better, yeah. Get it organized. Right. You want me to okay, I'm going to... Is that all right if I walk about? Okay, fine. Right, so good afternoon, everybody. So the brief was, I guess, about how technology... This guy fiddles with my trousers. How technology impacts marketing. And I want to put that in a framework of what we see going on in various parts of the world. So I've got sort of a few things I want to talk about generally. We have effective technology. Okay, right. So this is not an ad for WPP, but it sort of is. This does look rather messy, doesn't it? This is a still from our annual report, which was the voted the world's best annual report, so you should all read it, both in its traditional form and digital form. But it's a slide that describes our brands, and it is a house of brands. And the reason that it's like this is that we think there are diseconomies of scale in creative businesses. That the perception, and I should say the perception is that the bigger you get, the worse you get, both amongst clients and amongst people who work in the industry. I don't think that is the case, but it is the perception. The only area where we get significant economies of scale is in the area of media, what we call media investment management, what others call media planning and buying. And that's the area where we get the leverage. But effectively, it's not as messy as it looks on this drum, on this African drum. It's actually 16 verticals. You know, people here in India say we have 63 companies. We really don't. We have the same 16 verticals, by and large, operating in the Indian context. So that's that. Just to remind you that these are the sort of vital numbers of the current business. When I say today, it's actually last year. And we have billings of 76 billion. This is not a RECMA number. The RECMA number would be about 104 billion, which is a rate card number. Ours is an actual audited number. So in an era of greater transparency, I would call upon the industry to reveal its data, because we reveal our billings. We're the only company that gives you an audited billings number. We give our revenues, and actually not on this slide is net sales, because as we've started to act as a principal in online media buying, again, transparent and disclosed, not undisclosed, and as we've built our data business, where you have the difference between revenue and what used to be called gross margin or net sales, it becomes more and more important. But revenues last year were 19 billion, excluding associates. Associates are companies that we own 20 to 49% of, 23 billion including associates, 27 billion including associates and investments. EBITDA last year was $3.1 billion, PBT 2.5, 123,000 people in 112 countries. The 112th was Cuba. We have our man in Havana. The 113th will probably be Iran if sanctions are lifted. As a Jew, I have mixed emotions about Iran because they still indicate they would like Israel wiped off the planet. But from a commercial point of view, putting my personal feelings to one side, from a business point of view, Iran, with 83 million people, I think it is, same size as Vietnam, a third bigger than Myanmar, offers really very strong commercial opportunities. And remember that Iran has its population is highly literate. I think the literacy rate for men and women is about 99.5%. They're quite incredible. 112 countries, 179,000 people, including associates and including investments, almost 190,000 people. Cap is currently about 28, 29 billion, with the market having moved up a bit. Next highest market cap in the industry is Omnicom at about 16 or 17 billion. So there's quite a gap that POG tried to deal with, but in the end failed to do so. So strategy, what's our strategy? And this is highly relevant to the brief of technology and how that impacts us. Fast growth markets, of which India is one, and is the only BRIC that's still standing. And it's the only brick in the wall. Even if we called it the BRICs, including Indonesia and South Africa, India would be the shining light. And I think the Prime Minister understands the potential and the opportunity, and obviously has communicated it in an extremely strong and effective way, and is clearly a great communicator in the tradition of an Obama or a JFK or a Mrs. Thatcher or a Reagan or a Tony Blair, all of whom I think had tremendous communication skills. But India is certainly ticks the box as fast growth market. They're 31% of our business at the moment. We want them to be 40 to 45, despite the fact that the BRICS and the next 11 are not as fashionable. They were a virtue a few years ago. Now they're regarded as a vice. When I announced our half-year results, one journalist said to me, have you got your head in the sand because China is slowing down? I don't think so. China has gone through a remarkable 30-year development when hundreds of millions of people have been taken out of poverty, just like India since the early 90s. And if you think about the US becoming the world's greatest industrial power, it took them 100 years, and we went through spasms like the Great Depression of 1929. So it's natural that you're going to have fluctuations, that we saw that in Asia in 1997, we saw that in 2003, 2004 in China, we're seeing it again in China. So it's nothing in life goes up in a straight line. There's always a cyclical, but there is a secular trend that favors the BRICS and the next 11. That's why we're tying WPP's future to the BRICS and the next 11, to Asia, to Latin America, to Africa, the Middle East, and Central and Eastern Europe. Digital is 36% last year, first half of this year 37%. It'll be higher by the end of the year. Again, the target 40 to 45%. These are targets over the next 5 years. Data investment management. So our revenues are 19 billion. 5 billion of that is what we call data investment management, a posh phrase for market research or consumer insight. Ever since we put that nomenclature on, it seems that the growth rate has got a little bit better. So, just to remind you, out of the 19 billion, media is 5 billion in terms of revenues, data is 5 billion, and digital is 6. So 16 out of the 19 are in the areas that Don Draper would never recognize. The business has changed, and that's why we have to get, was with a few very successful youngsters, under 30, made me feel very old, and we were talking about the growth of the industry and the changes in the industry, and talking about the definition of creativity. The definition of creativity has shifted from the days of David Ogilvy, Don Draper, and Bill Bernbach. It is no longer confined to the creative department of the ad agency. Media people are creative. Data people, analysts are creative. Even account directors are creative. Planners are creative. Health people specializing in healthcare, branding and identity. Go to Cannes. You get a lion for data visualization. You get a lion for healthcare. The definition shifted. We, in the industry, I think, tend to be too narrow in our thinking about what constitutes creativity, particularly in a world dominated, I would say, by media, by data, and by digital. And lastly, horizontality, which is a terrible word. I don't think it exists in the Cambridge Dictionary. It might exist in the Oxford Dictionary, but I'm not sure it exists in the Cambridge Dictionary. That was a joke, by the way, but it fell completely flat. But a horizontality is about making sure that our people are working to the benefit of clients. Because like it or not, and we certainly don't like it in our industry, and the people who run our verticals don't like it, our clients want the best people working on their business. They are not interested, largely, not everywhere, but they are generally not interested in our verticals. They want the best people working on their business. So we have to come up with structures that are critically important. So I want to give you just 10 things. I think I was allowed 30 minutes, and then we're going to go into 10 things that... So this is apple pie and motherhood, but it's important from a technological point of view and how technology is impacting marketing. So if you're American, you think that New York is the center of the world, and I would still agree with that. But the world is changing, and it's moving to the east, China, India being the biggest examples, to the south. Latin America, despite all the troubles, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Mexico, markets like Colombia, Peru, still offer, and those markets I mentioned, the big three, still offer tremendous opportunities. And you're going to see it next year at the Olympics. It's not going to be easy. There will be, I'm sure, questions raised, but it will be a visually stunning event from a TV point of view and digital point of view, outstanding, and will underline yet again the potential of the Latin American continent. And Southeast means Africa and the Middle East. So now, part of the problem that we have is that people in mature markets, I think, the West, tend to, their desire is that really China and India will fail. When China slows down, you hear a lot of Western commentators saying this is the end of China. And it's probably because, to some extent, China and India and Brazil and Russia and Indonesia and Nigeria, they're really disruptors. They're rather like sort of the Google and Facebook, but on a geographical scale. They disrupt the established order, and the established order doesn't like that disruption. It makes them feel uncomfortable. But I'm totally convinced, I won't be here to see it, but in 25 years' time, I'm willing to bet that the projections are correct, that China will be the biggest country in the world by GDP. Currently, it's 10 trillion out of 72, 73 trillion. America is 16 trillion. India is about 2.5 trillion. The big five in Europe, UK, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, all around 2.5 to 3.5. Japan's about 5.5 trillion. But I'm willing to predict, or agree with the prediction, that China will be the biggest, US will be second, India will be third, and from a population point of view, the most populous country on the planet will be India. The second biggest will be China, and the third will probably be Indonesia. Fourth, America. So the balance is changing. The established order feels uncomfortable, feels partly threatened. And there's another observation here, just saying, when people say China's slowdown is an opportunity for India, that is not so, in my view. It's a threat. India will succeed. The better China does, the better it will be for India, and for the UK, and for the US. This is not a zero-sum game. The faster the world economy is growing, that's the biggest issue at the moment. It's not growing fast. The better it will be for all of us. So it's not good for India if China fails. In fact, what drove India, in my view, to change its economic policy and embark on a similar revolution to what we've seen in China in a very short period of time was neighborhood envy in the early 90s. It's when the Chinese tiger started to grow. And the Indians said, why can't we be like that? So the population, it gives India a tremendous advantage over the long term. The youth, the demographics of the population. China's big problem is their demographics are not as strong. So Shift in the balance of power. By the way, that has big implications for technology too. India is developing its Silicon Valley. China is developing its Silicon Valley, mainly in Beijing, and here obviously in places like Bangalore. So, second thing that we see is that, and you're seeing this acutely, if you look at the steel industry or the auto industry, the biggest thing, and this is great for us as an industry, demand is less than production. Despite all the problems that the US auto industry went through after Lehman, or around Lehman in 2008, when the big three, two went to the government for money. Chrysler and General Motors. Ford was the only company that didn't go for money. And the industry has contracted. It went from 16 or 17 million units to 9 million units, gone back up to 16 to 17. China is 22 million units and growing. Although it's softer at the moment, and some project it will go to 30 million units. So, but basically, the world can still produce 80 million cars, and consumers can still only consume 60. So that contraction in the US post-Lehman was balanced by more growth, or a greater amount of growth, in China, in India, in South Korea, in Japan, and elsewhere. So what does that mean? That means that differentiation of a tangible or an intangible nature is more important today than it's ever been. So our business, what's our business? Our business is about differentiating brands, products, services, either tangibly or intangibly. The big problem is on talent. Demand for talent is greater than the supply already, and look at the demographics. India is an exception. Most countries, the demographic is, it's going to be the aging problem, the problem that Japan has, that Russia has. That the aging of the population means, as people get greater life expectancy, greater healthcare protection, and work longer, family sizes diminish as women, thank goodness, come more and more into the working population. The pressures on family sizes get greater. The demand for the talent, the war for talent, which we already think is very significant, it won't be just the preserve of professional services businesses like our own, it'll be across all businesses. So companies will be differentiated on the basis of the quality of their talent, even more so than they are today. The third thing we see is disintermediation. This is where the technology thing is really important. What do I mean by disintermediation? I mean disruption. Google is in the disruption business. Google, by the way, is also not a technology company as far as we're concerned. It is a media company, as is Facebook, as is Twitter, as is all of these new AOL, Yahoo, and the like. They are media companies. They masquerade as technology companies. Facebook and Google are in the business of selling inventory, of monetizing inventory. And our clients are starting to wake up to that fact. And you wouldn't ask, whilst I have the deepest admiration and respect for the Murdochs, for Rupert, for James and Lachlan, or for Bob Iger, or for Philippe Doman, or Les Moonves, you wouldn't give them your media plans and say invest. So why do we have the player refereeing the match? And Facebook and Google are doing that. We've seen that come to the fore in measurement. You're aware that we've invested in Comscore and Remtrack because we don't think the Nielsen metric in the United States works. The hurdle for measurement of online is too low. The hurdle for measuring offline is too high. So when Philippe Doman at Viacom complains that Nielsen doesn't measure MTV and Nickelodeon right, he's dead right. May not be totally right, but directionally is. A 3-second view is not a view. If you're watching a video and half of the time the sound is not on, that is not a view. It's sound and light for video. So the standards we apply to traditional media are out of sync with the standards that we apply for online. And Keith Weed, who's CMO of Unilever, has said it's the 3 V's: value, viewability, and validation. So this whole metric thing, so that's one area. The other area is what appeared on the front page of the Financial Times last week about bots. And on YouTube, the botting, or the number of bots, is greater, according to independent research, than YouTube and Google had indicated. So clients are starting to say, should we look more carefully at the value we get of online video? And I think the pendulum is shifting back a bit, not a lot, but a bit, to some of the traditional media. And I'll come on to that in a second, because I think this is really important stuff. So in the area of technology, this is something, or comes from a slide that comes from a presentation of about 100 slides. You can YouTube, you can Google it. It's Mary Meeker, M-E-E-K-E-R. She's a partner at Kleiner Perkins, which is a very famous VC private equity firm on the West Coast. She used to be an analyst at Morgan Stanley. And Mary does this presentation every year. This is from the latest with 2014 data, basically the US. This is just one slide. So worth spending a little bit of time on this. So this is time spent, the yellow blocks, by consumers in America versus the investment the industry makes in various media. This is not WPP. This is the industry. So print on the left-hand side. And this is traditional print. So this is legacy print. This is felling trees and distributing newsprint. It is not mobile and internet print, which is in the right-hand columns. So print, 4% time spent, 18% investment. Out of kilter. Radio's about right. The Decaux brothers get very annoyed with me for putting this up because it excludes outdoor. Mary doesn't include outdoor, but outdoor would be about right. About right in terms of time spent and investment. In TV, 37% time spent, 41% investment. For the first time, or in this series of data, we're seeing a discrepancy between on TV. This is linear TV, traditional TV, not over the top, not internet. All the internet TV is over here on internet and mobile. And internet, roughly in balance. Mobile, way out of kilter. 8% investment, ad spend, 24% time spent. So clearly, what's happening is there are some changes. Now, there's a big discussion as to whether this data is good, because it's not about the amount of time you spend, it's the quality, it's the engagement. And when you look at some of the engagement data that we see, just look at newspapers for a minute. Engagement in newspapers, this is Canadian data, but it's the same. I can show you Australian data, British data, US data. The engagement, the quality of the engagement is higher on traditional. Now, if you fuse the two, if you put the two together, you get a very powerful combination. For example, we do television audience measurement, internet audience measurement in 45 countries around the world, including this one. We have an exclusive arrangement with Twitter to take their social data, and we've launched it in the UK and in Spain. And what it shows is that if you have, for example, two people sitting in front of a live television program, India's Got Talent or The Voice or whatever it is, they are more likely to tweet one another than they are to speak to one another. And what that tells you, a good example of it, is that the engagement with live TV may be greater than that data shows, or that we thought. So the engagement is terribly important. The next point is really important from a technology point of view as well. We had a little bit in the session that we had on geometry and the coming together of Compass and Geometry here in India to form the biggest online shopper experiential agency. And what this is important or that move is important in this context. Traditionally, retail has had the power over the manufacturer. The last 20 or 30 years, it's been Walmart, Tesco, Carrefour. They've had the power. They've had the control over the consumer at point of purchase, first moment of truth, last mile, etc. What's happening now, for the first time, is with the growth of proximity retailing, which means smaller retailers that are located in cities. 50% of the world's population lives in cities. It will be 70% in fairly short order. That drove that IBM campaign that we did called Smarter Planet, Smarter City. What's happening is proximity retailing is becoming more important, and e-commerce is being more important. So the manufacturer, for the first time, has the ability to connect directly with consumers like you and me and go over the heads of the retailers, which, interestingly, was the object of advertising 150 years ago when James Walter Thompson started J. Walter Thompson. That was the purpose of advertising, to go over the heads of the retailers and wholesalers to get directly to the consumers. The fly in the ointment for manufacturers could be Alibaba, Amazon, Flipkart, Snapdeal, because they may control that ground, that relationship through e-commerce with the consumer. So it's a very interesting potential battleground for manufacturers, for retailers, and the new e-commerce companies. Technology is also affecting internal communications. I would argue that the biggest challenge that chairmen and CEOs, and this is what Prime Minister Modi really understands, I think, the biggest challenge is how do you communicate, in the case of WPP, that multi-branded company I showed you on the first slide, which has grown by acquisition, which is a far more difficult model to manage than an organic growth model like a McKinsey or a Goldman Sachs, which has one brand. And internal communication is absolutely critical. The technology enables you to do that in far more effective ways. And organizations, I mean, I never cease to be amazed. I'm sure this doesn't apply to anybody in this room outside WPP, but I continue to be amazed by the ability of people inside companies to subvert corporate purpose. In other words, if I say go left, everybody goes right. So I figured out if I want them to go right, I say go left and they will go right. Now, some of you are laughing at that. It is amazing, and we see this with clients too. So internal communications, and technology enables them to do that more effectively, is, I think, critical. Getting people on side to the strategic purpose. You know, it is true that it's about strategy and implementation and bench strength and talent, but it's about setting the direction. And talking of direction and structure, what do we see going on, largely because of what's happened in technology, is regional is being squeezed. I think probably for negative reasons, because there's so much cost pressure on clients, but it's also for positive. So you're seeing global on the up, more power going to the center, but also more power locally. So WPP has client integrators, top 45 clients, 7 billion out of 19 billion of revenue, 38,000 people. We're integrating at a worldwide level. And we're also doing it at a local level. So Ranjan here in India, country manager, no authority, but responsibility of getting our people to work together. And making it work locally is important. So if you operate in 112 countries, how is it possible for anybody in London or New York, where our major headquarters are, to know what goes on in 112 countries? It's impossible. So you have to rely more on local and more on global. And the regional, you know, Jeff Immelt, I remember saying at the Microsoft conference a couple of years ago, regional has the power to say no, not the power to say yes. They stop things coming down, stop things going up. So GE has reorganized, I think it's into 19 business units reporting to the center. By the way, I think India should be taken out of the region of Asia, and China should be taken out, and they should be direct reports to the center. I think the same thing is true of Brazil and Russia. You can't treat a country like India or China with 1.2, 1.3 billion people the same way as you treat Singapore or Portugal or Greece with 4 or 5 million people. It makes no sense. I mean, the logical thing would be to split, if you want to do that, to split India and China down into smaller, more manageable units because they're not one country. So that is a big change that we see driven by technology. Now, not driven by technology, to some extent driven by technology, but not totally, is the rise of finance and procurement. If you asked me what is the thing that worries me most about our industry, It is the unwillingness of clients to invest for the long term. And it's complex. It's because growth is tepid, there's no pricing power because inflation is under control or even too much control. Deflation is the risk, and therefore there's a focus on finance and procurement. There's a focus on cost because we nearly all went to the wall in September 2008 with the Lehman. There's a focus on cost because of the disruptors at one end of the spectrum, because of the zero-based budgeting companies, the Lehmans and the 3Gs and the Valiants and the Endos, and then the activist investors in the middle pushing you for quarterly performance. Good examples of that. Nelson Peltz buys 1% of GE a few days ago and causes a media storm. Ellen Kuhlman steps down from DuPont again, Nelson Peltz putting pressure on from Trian, on DuPont, and Greg. And so all these things are driving an emphasis on cost. It's complex, but it's life. And I don't see, by the way, any upside breakout on GDP growth. GDP growth, I think, worldwide will stay in that range of 3.5 real, maybe 4.5 nominal, maybe a little bit more if inflation picks up, but it's not going to affect the real growth rate. So this is here to stay, and we have to get used to running our business on it. We can manage. The WPP model works with over 3% net sales growth, 30 basis points of margin, acquisitions of 0 to 5% on the top line. You work out, you get EPS growth of 10 to 15%, but it's in a cautious environment. Ironically, the people who I think who win are the people that have unconventional or unacceptable corporate structures to the corporate governance people. The corporate governance people would say 1 man, 1 woman, 1 vote. The most successful companies that we deal with are the ones that can take the long-term view and the ones that offend those corporate governance principles. Mark Zuckerberg has the golden share at Facebook. The Murdoch family have a controlling equity voting interest at News Corp and Fox. Neither would be something that corporate governance people approve of, but what it does do, it enables management to stay in place. Average life of a CEO in America is about 5 to 6 years. A CFO, 4 to 5 years. A CMO did get down to 18 months. The data's better. I'm glad to say it's only 2 to 3 years. But with people changing at that rate, they're bound to take the short-term view. It's like being a politician. You have to be re-elected. And your sort of horizon is 5 years or 6 years, whatever the term is. And talking of government, government is here to stay. After Lehman, the government got involved. I mentioned the Chapter 11 bankruptcies of the auto companies. We had the banks in the UK. The government became a protector and investor and became involved. The nearest historical precedent for this is 1929 Great Depression. Governments didn't get out of the way until the Second World War. And I'm not saying we should have a World War III in order to get governments out of the way. What I'm saying is they're here to stay, and it's interesting from an expenditure point of view. If I look at our client base, in most countries of the world, democratic countries of the world, the government is the biggest spender, with us and with the industry, particularly the year or so before the election. So government are going to be around for a long time. And the last but one point is sustainability. We over-intellectualize it. This week here in Mumbai, we announced this school of advertising communications with ISDI, which is linked to the Parsons School, and we now have 65 students up and running in a 3-year multidisciplinary program that our people teach and our people develop the curriculum. This mirrors what we've done in Shanghai. We have 150 students this year. It's now in its 4th year. We ramped up from 50 in the first year at the Shanghai Advertising and Design Academy. They give us the campus in return for naming rights, and naming rights in return for developing the curriculum and developing the teaching. Now, those are in addition, we've we started our CSR program here, following the change in government legislation on sustainability and CSR, and 17 WPP companies are working on programs with 3 major organizations here on disadvantaged youth and schooling opportunities, employment opportunities, and likes. But the point of the story is every company now puts purpose at the heart of what it does. I don't like the phrase sustainability or CSR that much. It's really about purpose. And everybody has a purpose, rightly, to do things that will benefit all the stakeholders. And there is very little greenwashing that goes on anymore. And when we get crises, when we get FIFA or whatever, sponsors have to do something about that. Because you can't sponsor something, and if there is the possibility of corruption, you have to do something about it. You can't support something. So it's not in accord with the purpose and objectives. So doing good is good business. We could sum up the whole thing. If you're in business for the long term, doing good is good business. That's an important qualifier. Because if you're in business for the short term, you wouldn't care. But if you're in business for the long term, that's what you would do. Now, what does all this mean? The last slide, here it comes. What does all this mean? So, if I was here a year or so ago, the industry was transfixed, our industry, by the possibility of POG. And now it's POG gone, it didn't work out. By the way, I would just add to be, I'm not a shrinking violet, but just to say, if that deal was sensible for clients, for the people and the share owners, which is what the 2 protagonists suggested it was, it should have happened despite the fact that social difficulties apparently caused the problem. If the 2 CEOs of a company who come out and say we should merge, if they really believe that to be the case, or unless it was just flim-flam, just an attempt to get attention, if they really believe that it worked, they should have stepped aside and made the deal happen. So what you're going to get, in my view, is more consolidation as a result of what we see going on in the marketplace. So low growth, low inflation, focus on cost means more mergers of clients, more, we'll see what happens with ABI and SAB Millers, more of that. More consolidation of media owners. Murdoch tried to buy Time Warner. My bet is he'll come back for that at some point in time, but there will be other consolidations. We've seen attempted consolidations. We've seen AT&T and DirecTV happen. There's going to be more of that. And lastly, in our business, in the agency business, that's going to continue too, because the pressures are just too great. And, I'll finish on, there's pressure on payment terms, there's pressure on how we deal with intellectual property problems. Unlimited indirect liability for IP breaches is being built into some agency contracts. So we are being asked to be bankers, to fund businesses, and we're being asked to be insurance companies, which is not our purpose. It's not our commercial purpose. So all these pressures, I think, mean consolidation. So I'll finish there. Those are the 10 things that we see. And a lot of them, as you can see, are driven by technological changes. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sir Martin. Please give him a big round of applause. Let's begin with your stay in India. You've been very busy, and it's been a very good year for WPP in India.
So far, we've still got 3 months to go.
Yeah. But your domination is so big. Why do you still need to come to India? I know you like the
It's nice.
food.
It's good fun. I like the food. It's good fun. I like mango chutney. Yeah. And it's good fun. No, our people are really good. We have 15,000 people here. They're very good. Some of them go outside India, and we export the talent. But it's, people are enthusiastic, they're committed. I mean, you could have asked the same question of David Ogilvy. You know, David never liked to fly, so he used to get on a boat and come to the AGM, I think, of Ogilvy here in India every year. I think it was partly because, you know, they translated his book into so many different languages and dialects here that he loved that. And, you know, he would have a rapt audience, quite rightly, for what he had to say. But, no, you know, I'd love our business. I've said this before whenever I come to India, and I'll say it again. If our business outside India was as good as India, I wouldn't have to work. I could retire, which would make a lot of people happy.
So I think ultimately we are all in the business of making people happy.
Yes,
so when
absolutely.
is that going to happen?
When is what going to happen? I'm happy or I
world
retire?
Domination.
World domination?
Yes. I mean, already one way to ask that question is, you know, the WPP revenue in India is just under 600 million.
Yeah.
And in China, it's about 1.6 billion.
Yes.
So when do you see in India we'll be close to that?
Well, it's going to be very difficult for India, whatever the growth rate is, to catch up with China. But just sort of step back for a minute. So China is 10 trillion. India is 2.5 trillion. UK is 3 trillion, 3.5 trillion. So the difference actually between UK and India is not that enormous, which is a lesson for us. But China is, let's call it, 3 or 4 times bigger. India is under-branded. I say this every time I come here. It's had zero effect. Maybe it's having a little bit of effect, but
what the PM is doing.
Yes, the PM is very good. I mean, he clearly demonstrates with Make in India, with Startup India, with Digital India, Stand Up, whatever. One thing I would just say is there's a danger of too much fragmentation. The Great Britain campaign, the Great Campaign, is a great campaign because it unifies government communication. And I think the other thing is, I was discussing with Piyush and others, it would be nice to have a Create in India campaign. I mean, I understand the reason for Make in India, which is India is seen as the service hub of the world. China was seen as the manufacturing hub. But a Create in India or Created in India campaign, because there is a lot of brain power and there's a lot of creativity in the widest sense of the words. And, you know, India does well at Cannes, for example, the Clios and all these things. You have Bollywood. You have a vibrant film and entertainment industry. You have a vibrant sports industry, although the T20 cricket side is not doing as well as perhaps it might, but we'll see what happens later on. I had to get that one in. I will not mention rugby in that context. But in any event, I just think...
it dovetails well with the fact that 2/3 of our GDP is also in services.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So I think created is also important to underestimate. I know the reasoning behind the Make in India, and it's been very successful, and I think the work is very good, and we've made a contribution to it too, and would like to contribute it even further.
So good. You know, you talk of technology, and you can't talk of technology without not talking of WhatsApp. The old saying was, the family that prays together stays together. The new saying is, the family that's on WhatsApp together stays together. Are you on WhatsApp with your leading CEOs and managers in your WPP organization?
What do you mean? In
WhatsApp. I mean, are you on
Yes.
WhatsApp?
Do I use WhatsApp with them?
Yes.
No,
Yes.
I rely... WhatsApp is for my wife.
Right.
She's an incessant WhatsApper. I've also sort of logged on to Hike as well, whilst I've been here. But no, I don't. I use email. And they probably get enough email. If I was on WhatsApp, it would be 10 times worse than that. So, but, you know, it's a bit like the sort of discussion of too many campaigns. You know, there are too many applications, and I think you choose one. I mean, if there's a major technological change as a result, you migrate. But no.
You're not yet on WhatsApp.
No.
A lot of people are relieved. You know, you met our PM in New York recently. And let me ask you this question. You know, both of you lead by example, right? both of you.
I'm very flattered you compare me to, but
No, I genuinely mean it.
I think the analogy is
you've delivered. Our PM will deliver. You've delivered.
You should be in advertising.
Yeah. So I was. You met our PM in New York, and is there a Modi in Sir Martin? Or let me ask you, is there a Sir Martin in PM Modi?
No, I don't think so. You can't make that comparison. I mean, I think the only comparison that I think would be fair, but he's operating at 50,000 feet, and I'm operating in the foothills, is, and I think this is important. So you have to have a clear strategy. I think to have any chance of success, it has to be simple. It can be wrong, by the way, but you have to have a clear strategy. So I can tell you what our strategy is in one sentence. Fast growth markets, digital data, and horizontality. That's it. Finished. Okay. Now it may be wrong, but it
works so far.
It can be communicable, right? Easily. Having said that, it's difficult to get the other side of it, which is implementation. And you remember that there was a fight amongst business school professors. What was more important, strategy or implementation?
Execution.
Execution. And there's more. It's strategy, structure, and I include in structure execution, implementation, and bench strength, right? Because structure covers bench strength. And the Prime Minister, I would say that's the similarity. So we have a clear strategy. We have, for good or bad, we focus on the implementation. It's very difficult to implement. I think on our if I was going to sort of self-check us, I think we've done well on the fast growth markets. I think we've done well on the digital. I think we've done well on the data. Where I still think we've got a lot of room for improvement is on the horizontality thing. Getting the full benefit out of that 190,000 people in one way or another in 112 countries should be the key mission. If we should turn the other thing upside down and start off with horizontality, because, and this is something for all companies, right? This is for our clients, media owners. I mean, media owners tend to be very siloed. Right? In fact, a Google and a Facebook, in the way they deal with us, I think, in a more effective way than the traditional media owners. I mean, we sit down and plan our business with Google and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat in a much more sophisticated way, interestingly, than with the traditional media owners. And we have an annual plan. We plan it out. We set objectives, and we look as to where we're going right or wrong. And that might be because somebody is looking at the situation with fresh eyes. So it's about strategy. So I'm flattered by the comparison, but I think the comparison is wrong. But the only area where
you've delivered.
It's strategy, implementation, bench strength. And with Prime Minister Modi, the strategy is there. The expectations are very high. What I hear from people here is people say, can it be done? And, is there the sufficient talent and bench strength to get it done? To be fair, I think he's doing the right thing, because if you look back, my favorite parallel would be JFK, who, in order to get America going, said, let's have a big hairy goal, get a man on the moon. And everybody looked at him and said, the guy's over-ambitious. And yet it was achieved. So I think if you set that ambitious goal and you deliver and you organize yourself in it, and I have little or no doubt that he'll be successful.
You started your entrepreneurial journey 38 plus years ago, right?
30 years ago.
30 years ago.
30 years ago. I'm not that old.
Yes, I know.
I'm pretty old, but not that old.
Now, if you were to start that today, what would some things you would do differently? And something you do exactly like you did 30 years back?
Well, we had a session at Davos, I remember, with John Wren and Maurice Levy and I think Michael Roth as well. And the four of us were asked that question. And I always remember I answered by saying I'd probably be private. I would start in the content and media area and technology. So technology, data, and content would sort of dominate. But, I mean, just that's what...
You back that up by making investments in content. Out of all the holding companies, WPP has more investments in content.
Yeah. Well, we believe that, we fundamentally believe that clients choose agencies on the basis of talent. We think we have the best talent, particularly here in India, but it may be occasionally that some of our competitors have some good talent. Just occasionally. Right?
Sam is referring to you.
Omnicom.
Sam.
No, Sam has talent. Omnicom, rarely, but occasionally. Publicis, maybe even more rarely. Havas, Dentsu, yes, occasionally. IPG, even IPG. But in order to differentiate, if you've seen presentations, I could only take 3 presentations. My mind couldn't absorb more than 3 presentations. So when 10 agencies make a presentation, I'm not sure how people evaluate them because, after 3 it morphs into 1, and I can't remember which one was which. So what you have to do, I think, is to differentiate on an additional basis. They don't substitute, they complement. Technology, so Xaxis and AppNexus, because we've got to have an agnostic platform against DoubleClick and Atlas. Data, so ComScore and RenTrack, as a different measurement approach, as an example, in addition to Kantar, and then content. So we invest in Vice. People laughed at Shane Smith. Young people are not interested in news. Nonsense. Young people are just as interested in news as we are supposed to be. They just like the style done differently and the approach different.
Absolutely.
So you get this sort of arrogant, snooty approach from, I won't name the organizations, who say, these journalists, what do they know? They're youngsters. And the fact is they are. They may have less experience, but they have a different way of doing things which is more contemporary.
And very, very narrative and storytelling.
Exactly. And Media Rights Capital, which produces House of Cards for Netflix, or Full Screen, 100 YouTube channels with Peter Chernin and AT&T, where we're developing content. Snapchat with Truffle Pig, so we're doing Refinery 29 with content for female millennials. Yeah. So all of these things, I think, are vital, and you have to experiment. And the final thing is, our objective is to get our traditional businesses, the 150-year-old J. Walter Thompson, despite my attempts to destroy the company, they've managed to survive. And to get them to move faster, we're along with Ogilvy and Y&R and Gray, which are the sort of core brands, to get our digital businesses, like a Wonderman or an Ogilvy One or a Possible or an AKQA or a VML, to move faster, even faster, and they're doing a good job at move faster. And last but not least, where we see our business being cannibalized, we may even have to eat our own children before anybody else does, because they will come along and they will cannibalize up, disintermediate, disrupt our business. What we have to do is to move faster. So experimentation, we shouldn't be frightened of experimentation.
Fantastic. On that count, I want to ask you the last question. Is there a Donald Trump in the agency business?
Is there a what?
A Donald Trump in the agency business? If there is one, who would that be?
Is
there a Donald Trump in the agency business?
Oh, is there a Donald Trump in the... Oh, boy, you're giving me a big opportunity here. But I will resist it. Is there a Donald Trump?
You're very expressive.
I'm sorely tempted, but I think on the grounds of decency, I will decline to answer that question.
Thank you for being a great sport. So we'll take 3 questions. And if you...
It's a very good question. Is there a Donald Trump in the business? It's really good.
I was expecting an answer.
Who was the bright spark who came up with that one? You? Yes.
So we'll take 3 questions, and if you have a question, please raise your hand. Tell us who you are. And
don't be shy.
If you want a job, then you know his email.
Don't be shy. Come on.
Can we get the mics around?
Otherwise, we'll do some cold calling. Sam,
any question? No question.
Is there a Donald Trump in the room?
There is a hand there.
Ah, good.
Yes.
Here we go.
Can you get the mic to the gentleman? Quickly. Crisp, very crisp question.
Do you think...
who? Please
okay.
give us your name and...
Hi,
your,
this is Rajiv Dhingra. I am the founder and CEO of What Consult. Do you think disruption like Airbnb, what Airbnb did to travel, or let's say hotels and staying at different places, can happen to advertising? Do you think something like that, where a platform is created to help both marketers and advertising agencies interact? Do you think that's a possibility in the future?
Well, I think the honest answer is it's probably already happened. You have crowdsourced platforms. In fact, one guy who left, it was quite a funny story. So we had a guy, I won't name him. You could probably put him in the Donald Trump category. He left one of the big agency holding companies, having run it, and started a sort of fund. And he bought one of the crowdfunding agencies. And immediately he bit the hand that fed him, because he immediately came out and said, the agency model is dead. Yeah. What I've been working on and had put him in the style to which he'd been accustomed is dead. And the crowd-funded platform, or the crowd-sourced platform, is the future. So I think, you look at examples like that. You look at, if you asked me to describe who our competition is, it is the people that I've mentioned or joke about, and they joke about us too. It is about some of the consulting and software companies. So it is about a Deloitte, about an Accenture, about an Oracle, a Salesforce.com, companies like that. It is, Google and Facebook are frenemies. So all of these companies, so there are different levels, and then there are, because in the data industry, there's Nielsen and Ipsos and GfK. So we have competitors of different, and they are, some of them are frenemies, some of them are not, some of them are enemies, pure enemies, as opposed to being people that we do. Google, our biggest media relationship is with Google at around 3 billion last year, 3.6 billion this year. So, and yet, they compete with us in various ways. So the answer to your question is the industry subject to the disruption of Uber or an Airbnb? Sure it is. And, you take production. Take Hogarth, which is our platform, our digital asset platform. So instead of people pulling down assets, print assets, production assets, willy-nilly in 60, 80, 100 countries or whatever it is where clients are, we have one digital, so you pull down one digital platform, you pull down the asset that you need at any particular point in time. So our business is continuously being attacked, disintermediated, disrupted, so much so that if you look at it, what's really interesting is if you look at the financial performance of WPP, Omnicom, Publicis, IPG, Havas, Dentsu, Aegis, and you take them as a group, and you look at how the stock market values, all of them are listed, and you look at how the stock market values them, and you compare them to our clients, particularly, let's say, the FMCG companies, those agency groups always have sold at a discount. And analysts increasingly ask, even though the performance of those companies is superior often, or at least the same, in terms of earnings per share growth and dividends and all the other metrics they use. And the question that's asked is, why is that the case? Well, inherently, the business is seen as being more cyclical, which is not, when you look at the numbers, is not justified by the discount at which the group sells. But the reason that it happens is we're perceived as being more volatile. We're perceived as being more based on personal relationships and personalities. Let's call it the Trump phenomenon, right? We'll christen that the Trump phenomenon. And the industry is seen to be more vulnerable to technological disruption, which is your question. Now, 4 or 5 years ago or 6 years ago, analysts would ask me the G question, Google's going to kill you. Well, we're still here. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean that, by the way, we're not going to get killed in 5 years' time. But we've managed to shift ourselves geographically and technologically, which are the two buckets that really are important, to take care of that, at least for the time being. Google is 360 billion as a market cap. We're 28 billion. Omnicom's 17 billion. That's the second factor. We're tiddlers in comparison, pygmies, in comparison to the giants that we have to. There may be an advantage of that, the motor torpedo boat versus the aircraft carrier, but it's still difficult. So that technological risk that you referred to, I think, is reflected in the discount that is applied to the sector by the stock market. And it's something we have to live with. So we had the G word. Then after the G word, by the way, we got the R word. You've gone through Lehman. You're going to get killed. And 2009 was a bad year. But 2010, we recovered sharply. 2011 for us was a record year. 12 was a record year. 13 was a record year. 14 was a record year. And 15 might be if we do all the things that we want to do for this year. So it hasn't been as bad in a tough world as people thought it was going to be. Now, by the way, that does not mean that you're not going to walk into a brick wall tomorrow morning. That can happen. So you still have to be paranoid. Andy Grove was dead right.
Only the paranoid survive.
Only the paranoid survive. And the only other thing I would make this is that I'm passionate about this because we started the business 30 years ago with 2 people in one room. And that is the difference between us and the competition. Interestingly, the only competitor that I think is like us temperamentally is Bolloré and Havas and Vivendi. The other competitors are what I would call management-led. That's not a derogatory phrase. But our company is certainly, it's in its first generation, and it is more entrepreneurial and more...
risk-taking.
I think so.
Making bets on the future.
Yeah, I think so. Well, the word bet always makes me... I use it as well, and I think some people ding me for it. So just for the future.
Just to make a distinction in your favor, the investments by the group you say is more like you are more personal in nature. The investments in new media by the group you said is more temperamentally like you are personal investments.
Yeah.
Like the latest investment, that is a personal investment.
Yeah.
It's not a group investment.
Well, I'm not making it personally, but it is. We're sort of making those decisions. The interesting thing about Bolloré, just for a minute, is that, and this never gets commented on, particularly in France, so saying it in India, maybe people will comment on it, is interestingly, for the first time, you have a model with Bolloré. So you have Bolloré Investissement, which is the listed family company. That owns 63% of Havas, which is an advertising and media group. That owns, I'm trying to remember the holding in Vivendi, I think it's 15% or 20% of Vivendi. That, which in turn owns now 20% of Telecom Italia. What you have, and inside Vivendi is Canal Plus and Universal Music. So for the first time, something that we couldn't do in the UK and we couldn't do in the US because of antitrust and competitive issues, you have a media owner and an agency in the same group. Very different model. And a mixture, it's interesting, hasn't caused any ripples yet, but my prediction is, maybe wrong, is it will cause ripples. Because there is a clear conflict of interest there. Clear conflict of interest. So you have a media owner and an agency in the same group. They're not owned by the same vehicle, but they're controlled by the same vehicle. So really interesting. But I would say that's the only group which sort of philosophically is similar.
So you could go on asking questions, but we are running out of time, so I'll ask the last question. I'm not going to take more questions. Because this session is about how technology impacts marketing in the market. You know, recently there's a cover story in the Bloomberg Business Week about advertising technology being misused and how agencies have been misusing advertising technology to boost viewership and, you know. So is technology being abused? And how do you see that? Is technology a bad master?
No, listen, there is a discussion, put it mildly, about transparency in our industry. You know, has what we call the tsunami of media reviews been driven by lack of transparency? I don't think so. The tsunami has been driven by the fact that media investment, so clients often say to me, not often, occasionally say to me, you're our biggest supplier. I don't like the word supplier. I would rather partner or junior partner, but they don't. Sometimes it's partner, but most times it's supplier or vendor. And I say I wish that was the case because they're including the media cost, which is money that flows through. That's 76 billion, whereas the real stuff is the 19 billion of revenue. And what this means is when we think about our business is that we have to focus on delivering value to clients in reducing that cost, because the cost pressure means that they want effectiveness, better work, and efficiency. So the review mania, tsunami, is being driven primarily by that. It's also being driven by a lack of understanding, or that's unfair, a concern that the fragmentation of new media and the growth of new media is calling into question. It's like that graph I put it up, the value of traditional. I think we're seeing a rebalancing now, but they don't know how much they should spend. So it's the holy grail. How much should I spend and where should I spend it? The old optimization issue. Then there is the transparency thing. And you know, we have been totally transparent. I'm asking the industry, and they're not going to do it if I ask, but billings figures, revenue figures, net sales figures, more margin analysis. We put in all our incentives. We declare it all. And by the way, the transparency thing is
why
really
do you ask that? I mean, of course,
well, because I think there should be transparency about it. For example, one of our competitors, doesn't matter who it is, has a massive barter business in the US. Massive. You know, billions of dollars of revenue, probably as much as 2 billion, which is big, which is undisclosed. That's a black box. People say on transparency, which is very important in relation to your Bloomberg piece, so we, for the first time, are buying inventory as principal online through Xaxis. We disclosed that. Omnicom did not disclose it until they were taken to task on a quarterly earnings call when Randy Weisenberger was still there before he left, where they were forced to disclose, under some pressure from analysts, if you listen to the transcript, whether they were a principal or not. And an analect does act as a principal. We've said that from the very beginning, that we will not disclose the buy price. The client knows what the price is they pay. They are totally at liberty to compare that to the price that they will have to pay elsewhere, or they can get it audited against elsewhere. They can see it. Now, the problem on transparency, not to overburden it, and this is really an important point, I don't mind the transparency as long as it's applied equally. Now, it means competitively, right? So people should give out the same data. And it also means that Facebook and Google should be transparent. Our clients should go, procurement departments, should go to Facebook and Google and ask how the algorithms work. I doubt whether they're going to be told the answer. And by the way, they should reveal their margins too. You know, people look at our margins, we're transparent about it. We should know what the margins on search are, what the margins on video are. I mean, it should be fair for all sides.
So, thank you, Sir Martin. I could go on chatting with you. It's fascinating. I learned a lot. I hope all of us in the room learned a lot. So please give a big round of ovation to Sir Martin Sorrell, Dr. Subhash Chandra, who is India's original media mogul and the biggest media mogul is here. So we are lucky to have his presence. He's all for Make in India in every aspect. I just want to narrate a serious incident. When our Prime Minister became the Prime Minister, he banned all the honeymoon couples to go out of India. You know what he said to them?
What?
Make in India. So on that note...
Well, what about created in India?
I think that's better. Good to chat with you. Please give him another round of applause. Enjoy.